First, I invite Barbara Cassin to present.
Thank you for your presentation, and interrupt me after 10 minutes, okay? So I'll try to speak. As you've said, I'm a specialist of Greek philosophy, and Greek people pretend they are the initiators of philosophy, of not wisdom, but love for wisdom or pursuit of wisdom. And I want to try to take a certain distance from this point of from this Greek point of view towards the problem of voice and speech. So Greek philosophers always made frameworks like that, and they say, for example, that things make noises. This is a noise. That animals have voices that can express pleasure or displeasure. Meow. Meow. Okay. This is pleasure or displeasure for a cat. And this is a voice. And then they say that only men can speak. That is to say, express something else than sensations like pleasure and displeasure, but display meanings, meaningful sounds. And this is what they call, with a special word, logos. And logos is a word that went throughout all the history of philosophy. And I want to stay a little bit in this word. Logos, what does it mean? Well, Latin translated it very accurately by two words, ratio, reason, and oratio, discourse, speech. So logos, what we usually translate by what? If you open a dictionary, Greek, English, you find at least 20 or even 40 words to translate logos. How is it possible? Well, it is possible when you begin by thinking, what does it mean exactly? It means A under B equal C under D. It means a proportion. It's a mathematical thing. It's the relationship between things. So logos means, first of all, relation. And that's why it could mean at the same time all the words, sentences, demonstrations, speech, and all the rational links between all these. So ratio and oratio. This is a very important word in Greek. What does it mean? It means that men are the animals who has logos. And when they have logos, I am here following a philosopher from the 5th century, for the 4th century before Christ, Aristotle. When they have logos, they can express meanings. That's to say, they can express something else than sensation of pleasure or displeasure. They can express, and I quote Aristotle, right and wrong, good and bad, something like that, this type of relation. And this type of relation is a political relation. As soon as you can make not a consensus or a dissensus, but a togetherness between those things, you are a political animal. So men are at the same time, these are the two definitions made by Aristotle, are at the same time animal which doted with speech, or with reason, as you like, with logos, and a political animal. And those two are linked together. Now, I want just take a kind of distance with this definition. it seems that they are absolutely universal. All men, every man, we all have logos. We all are politikoi animals, politics animals, and we all speak, and we all have a reason. Is it so true? Is it so true in Greece itself? The point is that this type of universal, which is expressed by a word, logos, is a Greek universal. And it left out a large, maybe immense part of manhood. Those who are not universal in this way, who are not really logical, political animals. Who are they? Greeks say they are barbaroi. And I say that you hear a voice, you hear my voice, that these are sounds that you don't understand. Blah, blah, blah. Barbara. That's my name, Barbara. Okay, so when you don't have logos, you are something like a barbarian. What does it mean? It means that if you don't speak as I do, as I, Greek philosopher, Greek people do, if you don't speak Greek, you don't speak at all. Maybe you are an animal. Maybe you just have a voice with sounds, meaningless or meaning just pleasure of pain, and not meaning anything political. So maybe you can be a slave, and that's what happened in Greece. All the barbarians are slaves, or could be slaves in Greek policy. They are like animals. And where is it anchored? It's anchored in the fact that Greek people speak only Greek and don't speak any other language. They were fiercely monolingual, as can say Momigliano, for example, a great historian. Fiercely monolingual. For them, speak Greek and be a man, it's the same thing. So you can understand now why I'm so interested in translation and in untranslatables, in difficulty of translation. It's just because I think that if you begin to see your own language as a language, one among others, if you can begin to think like that, you will at the same time begin to think that the other, the one you don't understand immediately, that the other is not a barbarian, is not an animal, is not a slave. And this is the point of distance with the ordinary Greek philosophers, you know, and the ordinary Greek city-state. So let me just recapitulate in 1 minute. Man, universal man, has logos, ratio and oratio, discourse and speech, and reason, and men are all political animals. Okay, except those that don't speak like you, that maybe are not men, that maybe are just voices, are just animals. And if you want to deconstruct this, you have to think of a plurality of tongues, and you have to think of a plurality of translations. And this is exactly the name of what Derrida, this is exactly what Derrida called deconstruction. He said that he had to, Derrida, you know, it's a very well-known French philosopher, but known about the French and maybe US people, contemporary, and he proposed to deconstruct, to debuild the ordinary philosophy. And this, a way of this deconstruction is what he called more than one language. He said that if he has to resume in a very rough way and very simple way his deconstruction of history of philosophy, he will say more than one language. This is the definition of deconstruction by him. More than one language, it's to say that be careful with universal. Be more careful than the Greek were, because Greek thought they were universal philosophers and man, the only possible image or essence of man, and that all the others were only barbarians, but maybe it was just because they couldn't make a meaning in the voices the others are uttering. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Let me give explain in Malayalam. ഹലോ, ബാർബറ കസാൻ പറഞ്ഞത് നോയ്സ്, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ നമ്മൾ മലയാളത്തിൽ ബഹളം എന്നൊക്കെ പറയുന്ന ശബ്ദം, നേരത്തെ അവരിങ്ങനെ കൊട്ടി ഒരു ശബ്ദം കേൾപ്പിച്ചല്ലോ. ഈ നോയ്സ് എന്നത് അല്ലെങ്കിൽ ബഹളം എന്നത് നമ്മുടെ ഓർഗാനിക് വേൾഡിലുമുണ്ട്, ഇനോർഗാനിക് വേൾഡിലുമുണ്ട്. ബസ് പോകുന്ന ശബ്ദം, മരങ്ങൾ കാറ്റ് പിടിക്കുമ്പോൾ ഉണ്ടാകുന്ന ശബ്ദം, ഒരു ഗ്ലാസ് താഴെ വീണ് പൊട്ടുമ്പോഴുണ്ടാകുന്ന ശബ്ദം, ഇതൊക്കെ നോയ്സാണ്. ഇത് മനുഷ്യരുടെ ലോകത്തിലുണ്ട്, മൃഗങ്ങളുടെ ലോകത്തിലുണ്ട്. ഇത് രണ്ടുമല്ലാത്ത ഇനോർഗാനിക് വേൾഡിലും ഫിസിക്കൽ വേൾഡിലും നോയ്സ് ഉണ്ട്. എന്നാൽ വോയിസ്, മീനിങ് ഫുൾ നോയ്സ് എന്ന് വേണമെങ്കിൽ പറയാം വോയിസിനെ. ഈ വോയിസ് ഉള്ളത് ഒരു പരിധിവരെ ആനിമൽ കിങ്ഡത്തിലും അതിനേക്കാൾ ഏറെ ഉപരിയായി മനുഷ്യരുടെ ഹ്യൂമൻ ബീയിങ്സിൻ്റെ വേൾഡിലുമാണ്. പിന്നീട് അവർ പറയാൻ ഉദ്ദേശിച്ചത് ഈ ഗ്രീക്ക് ചരിത്രവുമായി ബന്ധപ്പെട്ട് ലോഗോസ്, റീസൺ ഡെവലപ്പ് ചെയ്തതോടെയാണ് ആനിമൽസ് മാത്രമായിരുന്ന മനുഷ്യൻ പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ ആനിമലായി മാറുന്നത്. ഇതാണ് മനുഷ്യനെ സാർവലൗകികമായി ഡിഫൈൻ ചെയ്യുന്ന അടിസ്ഥാന ക്വാളിഫിക്കേഷൻ, അടിസ്ഥാന ഘടകം എന്നത് അവൻ്റെ ലോഗോസ് ആണ്, മീനിങ് ഫുൾ സ്പീച്ചാണ്, പ്രൊപ്പോർഷനാണ്, റേഷ്യോ ആണ്. ഇത്രയാണ് അവർ പറയാൻ ശ്രമിച്ചത് എന്നാണ് ഞാൻ മനസ്സിലാക്കുന്നത്. അടുത്തതായി നെക്സ്റ്റ് ഐ ഇൻവൈറ്റ് ഷാജ് മോഹൻ ഫോർ ദിസ് കോൺവെർസേഷൻ.
Can you hear me? Yeah, okay. I have this one. Barbara and I have a kind of philosophical conversation ongoing for a long time, and in fact, if you look at a general territory, we are always in agreement. So I'll start with something that Barbara in a way formulated and taught me, which is that there is no universal, but only someone's universal. Because whenever somebody says, it is a universal category, it always has the potential to imply that it is that some persons or those particular people's universal. Now, if we take I see. Okay. If we take a classical, are you able to hear me at the back? Okay. Okay. So if we take a classical idea, or let's take a classical statement. Protagoras, he said that man is the measure of all things. But what happens in practice is that some men become the measure of all the other men. Right. So in some ways, I'm going to again reach the same terrain that Barbara reached, but through a slightly different route. So for a very long time, since I think for the last 10 years, my research had been focused on two aspects of philosophy. One, the problem of voice, and the other is the use of reason, because reason, today we understand it as scientific reason or a kind of scientific rationality, but that word never stabilized in any fashion. If we look at the history of reason, which is far more detailed than that. So one of the directions I took was to investigate the conceptual formalities which are involved in thinking about both voice and reason, and that formality can include things like principle of sufficient reason. A formality means that something can be distinctly articulated and even formalized so that it can be recursively deployed. And then there are thematicities like university of being, equivocity of being, as Raghu had mentioned in the beginning. These are thematic issues in theology and also in philosophy. And then further, I was also interested in the epistemological categories which concerns these two terms, which includes the confused, the clear, the obscure, and so on. But recently, in order to articulate what exactly happens with the investment of voice with a certain value of human speech, or a kind of authoritarian human speech, which allows us to say either equally with what we call ahankaram, man is the measure of all things, or if we paraphrase it, some men becoming the measure of all the other men. I was compelled to enforce a distinction between noise and voice. But now the issue here is that I'll go over the terrain of some of the things that Raghu said. One is that whenever we say voice, often in our common milieu, we understand by it, somebody is speaking over there and you can hear that it is that particular person. For example, MT, who speaks very less. When MT speaks, we know that it is his voice. Or, we are also a culture of mimicking of voice in Kerala. So in a way, we have not only a deep familiarity with the signature of each individual's voice, but we can also replicate it. Then there are other logical circumstances in which the same word voice is used, but the use is entirely different. So when we say that somebody, like he said, dvayartha prayogam. So an example would be the word bank. So if I tell somebody that I am at the bank, then I could be at the bank of a river, or I could be at the money bank. So these are instances of equivocation in language. And now, univocation, which means you mean the same thing. Now, one example would be to say that Socrates is an animal and that horse is also an animal. In both cases, the word animal means the same thing. But this is not really the problem of voice inside philosophy. And this is a problem that is actually unknown to the Greeks. This could be, a property of individual languages. In fact, again, I would like to quote Barbara. Barbara has a very beautiful formulation of what constitutes one particular language, or what allows us to identify one particular language, which is that equivocal statements like bank can mean these two things in English, or bark can mean the bark of a dog and the bark of a tree in English. And that is the signature of one individual language. So in that sense, from the point of view of the signature of a language to the flexibilities and properties syntactically allowed by that language, these things concern linguistics in a way. Inside philosophy, the problem of voice enters through a kind of Arabic theology, where the question is of who is capable of speaking the whole truth of the world, and it's only one God. And this problem enters medieval theology in Europe through the translations of works like Al-Kindi, Averroes, Avicenna, and so on. And this is not really a problem for the Greeks, unless we enforce an interpretation again back on them. So in order to look at the role voice plays, I had to make a distinction between voice and noise. Now, the thing about noise is that these words have ancient roots, certainly. If you take the word voice, then you will find a mythical, for me it is pure myth, of the root called Proto-Indo-European. This myth that we continue to use, PIE or Proto-Indo-European, implies to us at least that there was some kind of a people who are very special, and they created all these words, and we continue to inherit, or we are dependent on them. So it is again going back to the theme of some men becoming the measure of all men, but here we speculate. In India, the Hindu nationalists can claim to be those men, or in Germany, as we found, some Germans could claim to be those men. So that's an ugly game. But the word voice is available in, for example, Sanskrit. We continue to use it in Malayalam as vak, or in Sanskrit, it's in Vedic text, it's vach. And vach definitely means a speech which is clearly distinguished. And they also make a distinction, in later texts. I think it's the Yajurveda a time that the distinction between those who speak Prakrit and those who speak Sanskrit. That is, those who speak well-cultivated tongue and those who speak very primitive, uncultivated tongue. That distinction appears, but both share still Vaj. They both have this meaningful speech. Now, noise is a very different entity because obviously all cultures use the word noise, but not in a formal way. So, noise, if we take a speculative etymology, it comes from nausea and it could come from nausea, and in Greek it could be the feeling of being on a ship. The root is again shared in Sanskrit as nawa, and in Malayalam it becomes nauka, which means again a seagoing vessel, and the feeling of nausea is something that is induced by this kind of emotion or motion sickness. But is it really? I mean, that's one of the enforced roots, and there is another root which is very evident in Sanskrit and also Vedic, which is nasha. Something which is already destroyed, something which is no longer coherent, something which is already destroyed. So there are these roots possible, but what I am going to try to say is that these questions at all times have a certain sense of irrelevance to us, because they always ask us this question: what did they think? This they can be the Proto-Greeks, this they can be the so-called Vedic Aryans, it can be the ancient Chinese. So in every situation where we ask what did they think, we also want to derive a lineage with them. In terms of genetics, it's a ridiculous idea because we have nothing to do with any of those people. The people who are living today have, I mean, if anybody wants to speculate on the basis of genetics, there is nothing left. In terms of linguistic and cultural activities, there is nothing left. But there is an insistence on constructing something that can be called some men who can speak with authority to all the other men, and some men who can be the measure of all the other men. Now, noise, in the sense in which I use the term, is something that follows from Hartley's theorem and Simon's theorem, which allows us to have these devices, the devices through which we can create and maintain the transmission of information, signals, continuous analog systems. Now that requires a certain kind of formalization, and that formalization requires mathematical knowledge of logarithms, probability, and differential equations. Now this notion is ours, and our relation with, therefore, voice and noise are already mediated by this technological systems. Now, this occasions me, that's a separate question, we can come back to it, but this occasions me to think about another meaning of the word voice in philosophy. The great philosopher Martin Heidegger, he really felt that the history of philosophy spoke continuously in the voice of the ancient Greeks and no one else. And later he also found that the ancient Greeks were not enough. It had to be okay. It had to be modern Germans. Now this is about the voice of one particular population which determines itself under the umbrella of some kind of centrism. It can be an ethnocentrism, it can be a linguistic centrism, it can be, let me give an example. I mean, today we have a kind of Hindu-centric Indology and study of ancient Indian texts, which means that all the truths about the world were first spoken by these so-called Indo-Aryans in a fantasy, and this truth emerged out of here and then it went to elsewhere. So this particular myth can even be given a very simple general formulation. So each centrism would argue that it happened here first and then everywhere else. So this process of insisting on a voice which doesn't exist anymore. The Vedic Indo-Aryans died and perished a long time ago in what would be today's Afghanistan and Pakistan. They didn't have anything to do with this place. Or the same with ancient Greeks. They, as Gandhi famously said, they disappeared without a trace. But then the traces are found only much later through other sources. So these people, when we adhere to their voice, there are two possibilities. One is to certainly learn from the earliest instances of human thinking, human discoveries, and there is something definitely to be learned from there. There is a sense of wonder to be gathered from it. But at the same time, the moments we derive a genealogy from those sources, be it India, or be it in China, or be it in the Nordic region, or be it in Europe, anywhere, whenever we want to speak in the voice of some others who had gone long past, we are getting trapped into a certain centrism which prevents us from hearing our own voice. So the question we ought to ask always is not, what did they think? We must return philosophy to the question, what do you think? This question, what do you think, is something that you can ask yourself, you can ask your friends, and the occasion in which, with the wonder and also with a kind of friendship and intimacy where we ask this question, what do you think, instead of the hostile question, what did they think? I think that would be the possibility of beginning a new voice inside philosophy.
So before your time to ask questions or interact with the speakers, I would like to ask one question to Barbara Cassin and the second question to Shaj Mohan. As you said, what makes us be humans is logos, and logos is the most important factor that makes us political animals. Then we humans have been around here for about 200,000 years, and as far as I know, the idea of logos emerged some 2,500 years ago. So my question is, whether we humans as a species has been a political animal right from the beginning of this species, or we became political animals only recently, that is 2,500 years ago.
What do you think of it? What do you think? Because there are a Greek answer, which is that they invent the universal politics. This is the Greek answer, and I took my distance with it, saying that the price to pay was to figure the others, that's to say the non-Greek, are non-political. And you can enter into details. You can say that they are slaves because when they are all together, they obey a master, an emperor, a Persian emperor, for example, and they don't obey to their way of consensuality, their way of discussion, to their freedom. They are not free. They are even not free in politics, and you cannot conceive politics without freedom. So this is a Greek answer that is, if you say this, you cannot conceive politics without freedom. I think that we all agree. But what does it mean exactly? If you are Greek, it means that people who are obeying without being able to command at another moment are not free. And they are not political animals. They are just slaves. So, you see, I cannot answer like that. And that is why I think that our actual task as philosopher is something like to complicate universal. We all can agree general statements. We need freedom to be political animals. Okay. But what does it mean?
So, okay, could you please explain then what were the political and intellectual events that made an organic species, or that transformed a biological species into a political species?
I don't understand.
What he means is that
Was-
what transformed humanity or political and intellectual events that transformed a biological species.
I, of course, cannot answer such a question, but I can try to explain how I hear it. If I am Greek, I will say that the things that transform a pure biological species, if ever it has been the case, and I am not sure it is the case, into political species is speech. That is not only blah blah blah, but a reflection and an art of speaking. And this art, Greek called it agon, that's struggle between different speeches. And the first freedom they experiment as real freedom for man is to be able to disagree, and I've seen that on your t-shirt you have something like that, to be able to disagree and to talk together when you don't agree. So this is the political transformation, to be able to talk together when you disagree instead of just killing you.
My question to Shaj is could you distinguish between philosophy and exegesis? Because because I'm asking this question that he has in his talk he has mentioned about Rigveda and Navya Nyaya, etc. So, and we Indians had a very long history of exegesis, or we have a very long and in-depth exegetic tradition. So then I would like to know what is the fundamental difference between philosophy and exegesis?
Can I use this one? Yeah, I'll use this one. Okay. Wherever the process of exegesis appears, it also means that somebody is trying to create also what for this occasion can be called one continuous voice of one people. So exegetical traditions, while they disagree about some of the one or two minor details, for example, in India, the Mimamsa tradition, you can take an example. There are minor disagreements. There are even fundamental disagreements about university and equivocity in terms of non-dual and dual, or Dvaita and Advaita and so on. And even in these moments, certain principal doctrines are maintained as untouchable. We can take an Indian example. Indian example would be the maintenance of the caste order, the maintenance of certain texts as primary, which includes the Rigveda particularly, and the Brahmanas. Brahmanas also, isn't it so? In the Mimamsa tradition, yes. The Brahmanas also. And in the same way, in the Catholic tradition, it's a very heavily exegetical tradition which happened in Europe, and it made great discoveries. There are great battles going on, but all these battles do not touch a few central problems. One, there are three persons in the sense of God, the Holy Spirit, and the Son. And two, God created the world, and the world has a relation, continuing relation always with God. And three, there is the problem of sin, and therefore the church has to have a role in mediating it. So there are certain doctrines which remain unchanged in spite of great discoveries in the area of maybe logic, and some, even you can say that some in protophysics. So exegesis has these two purposes. On the one hand, generate something new, while always making sure that there is one voice or of one particular people, or a doctrine speaks the history of that particular people. Philosophy should always be distinguished from this, because philosophy doesn't have to be theological, philosophy doesn't have to be exegetical. It always leaves the possibility of thinking to start from somewhere else again. A thinking which doesn't have to refer to anything else. One good example in 20th century is actually Wittgenstein. So he's not somebody, Ludwig Wittgenstein entered Cambridge University as someone who wanted to do a doctorate in aeronautical engineering, and he was working on a jet propulsion system. He had no education in philosophy. But then he suddenly became interested in it. He learned a few early doctrines of people like Bertrand Russell and Whitehead, and then he thought that this was enough. And then he produced a great work, a startlingly original and great work called Tractatus Logico Philosophicus, which has a sprinkling here or there of a few names, like I think Kant is mentioned indirectly once, Schopenhauer is mentioned indirectly, but other than that there is nothing. In fact, he has to invent a new language which we all use today, a certain propositional articulation of logic in terms of tables, truth tables, which we all use in schools and universities. He was just forced to invent it so that he could speak. Yes. You have something to say? She wants to say something.
Yes, I perfectly agree with the difference. I mean, you can always begin with a new start. Mm? That's the point. Exegesis is exegesis of something existing, but here you can always begin. And I would just add a precision. You quote Protagoras, man is measure of everything, of all things. There is another very important statement of Protagoras about the virtues of politics. There are two political virtues and two only. And this is also to answer to your question with exegesis. There are two political virtues. The first is the sense of shame. That's be conscious that you are looked and that you are looking, that you are watching at and you are watched at. This is the sense of shame. And the second is the sense of repartition, dike, deiknoumi, the word which is translated by justice, means repartition. So if you have a sense of repartition and a sense of shame, you are political.
So just yeah.
No, this is just a curious question to you, because we in Calcutta, we recently had a conversation in Calcutta where we all tried to speak indirectly about the event known as May 68, which determined a lot of political currents in Kerala, which continues to determine it. So one of the slogans at that time was power to the imagination. Why would they say, why wouldn't they say something casual like power of the imagination, which means that it's a kind of abstract faculty, but power be given to imagination, which means that a capability to imagine has to be given to all. So in this context, just a question, which is that kakon would be a kind of evil. Kakon. Yeah, bad. Yes. So on the other hand, there is the other word called edikon. Yeah, edike. Yes. Could you? Yes, exactly. So could we, hear from you this distinction and the gesture, whether there was an attempt in Greek societies to remove kakon or bad from some people so that they also would be able to participate in the discourse of decay, or today, it's often translated as justice.
I'm not sure I understand.
Okay, Barbara, the question is this, that when we say power be given to imagination, we mean that it is lacking, it is not there. There is an absence
not
of
enough.
power.
Not enough.
Exactly. And we all have to give this power to everyone around us. It's our responsibility. Was this responsibility available to the Greeks?
I'm sorry. I'm really bad with. Yes, tell me more. What the responsibility of the bad thing?
No, no. What I mean is that, the slogan "power to the imagination"
Yes.
means that we, people like us who are overcultured, have the responsibility
Yes.
to make sure that there are conditions, political conditions of imagination,
Yes.
and those conditions should be made available to everyone.
Yes, that's true. Yes.
So, did the Greeks have this kind of an approach to politics?
I don't think so.
Okay.
I think that they have the sense of equality between, well, what they call imagination was essential to every moment of life. And so it was also essential to politics, to literature, to poetry, to music, and all this is part of politics. So this is the first thing. But we must never forget that Greek city or Greek city-state was a very small one, without women, without any slave, without any stranger, that there were very few citizens. And so there was an equality in a huge inequality. And that's what I try to point out with the universal as belonging to someone, the universal of the citizen. But who are the citizens? 100 people.
This is, I was roughly also trying to bring the conversation to just this fact that perhaps May 68 has more significance today to us than the Greeks maybe even. Yes.
So, as Shaj Mohan said, some men becoming the measure of all other men. What happened in India, some text, some primordial text, some primordial voices or sounds like Om, unfortunately have become the measure of all later text and sounds. So do you think that this, some text, primordial text, becoming the measure of all later texts, prevented the emergence of true thinking and philosophy in India?
I think I can only be given a simple answer: yes, absolutely.
Audience can ask questions.
Okay. My question is to Barbara. It's about, it's about the theme itself, the voice and philosophy thing. I've been going through some Slovenian text about these things, and voice has been, let's say, divided or differentiated into 5 dimensions there. The first being linguistic, the second being metaphysical, the third, of course, physical voice, and the fourth being the ethical voice, and the fifth is the political voice. So I'm coming to the political voice. Right now, the situation in India can also be taken. So the political voice can be treated as the phone and the logos, right? So this, I don't remember his name right now. He's a Slovenian. It's not Zizek. It's a Slovenian. Zizek is quite popular among us. So it's Dollar, I think. You heard of Dollar? He belongs to that same school. Mladen Dollar. So he came up with this rather fascinating analogy from films. He's a film critic also. And that film pertains to Charlie Chaplin's Great Dictator. In The Great Dictator, you can specifically go into the voice and philosophy stuff. In the sense, the first dictator, the original dictator, Chaplin, he comes and makes a speech in gibberish. Nobody understands the language. In fact, there is no language in it. It's only just gibberish. But still, the people understand it. And the people are for it. They clap their hands. They are happy that they got a leader like this. Okay, in the second half, it's the barber Chaplin who comes and he talks logos. He talks about humanism, and at the same time, the same people, they clap their hands and they are affiliated, or they have an affinity towards this barbarous humanistic speech, as well as the tyrants or the despots' gibberish speech. So, as far as this topic is concerned, the voice and philosophy, the voice, whatever it may be, the philosophy, whatever it may be, the people, let's say the folks, we all care, the folks, they go for it at every period of history. That is happening right now in India. Yeah? So, this the attitude of the people towards voice, that I think is a universal aspect. It happens everywhere, and that is how the fascists, even in Mussolini, the time of Mussolini, now we talked about Hitler, and I can go to Stalin also, because Stalin used to be a very good, a very bad orator. That's what the books say. He used to be a very bad orator, and it was a very soporific thing, reading all those stuff for the party congress, and people used to go, they sleep actually, and that's why maybe he said the enemy never sleeps. Okay, and so, but the people don't listen to Stalin because it comes in the next day's papers, or it gets published. All those blah 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 things in the that is being published in, that's okay. So the voice and the philosophy and the people, how they take it. Do you have anything more to elaborate on this particular stuff, the way that people accept the voice in philosophy? Thank you.
I would like just to, I'm very interested and very agree with the, I do agree with you with the example of Dictator, etc. And you gave the answer saying that they were just, and people in the parliaments often just hear the blah blah blah. That means that they hear the voice, the phonai, the sounds, and the rhythm, but they didn't hear the meaning. And you make the point when you said that the first dictator was just saying blah blah blah, and then Charlie Chaplin, the barber, says humanistic things, but with the same rhythm, but just there was another meaning, and there was a meaning. And what I try to point out with the word logos is that to be a political speech and to be a political animal, you have to pay the most utter attention to meanings. That's all.
My knowledge in this topic is very limited, but still I have this question, like whenever we speak about this voice and philosophy, like we align the word voice with human beings, or we approach the term with this anthropocentric theory, or but is it high time that we need to learn about the noise around us? Like then only, I guess that then only we can imagine something sustainable. I don't know whether I'm asking the right question, but I'm not sure. Yeah, it's to the panel. Anyone can answer. Yeah, thank you.
No, her question is that when we, obsessively speak about voice, aren't we speaking anthropocentrically, and therefore we are ignoring all the other things around us, and instead we should also start to attend to noise. In fact, this is what I try to do. Yes, this has been my concern through various categories. One, epistemologically, to pay more attention to the categories of confused and obscure as opposed to the categories of clear and distinct. And as opposed to our obsession with voice, also to give attention to noise. Yes, I agree with you. Yes.
No, I don't.
There's no one else?
I would like to ask this question. How can we use silence as a way of articulation? Silence is like when language speaks less, silence can be used as a supplement for the means of articulation. So when we say voice, there is of course a logos is there, a word is there. Uh, when this person spoke about, he said about some words I used in articulation. So in the time of censorship, when we are facing censorship and silencing and all, how silence can be a means of articulation? How silence become a voice? Can silence become a voice? Anyone in the panel can answer.
That's a very important question. Well, yes, the immediate answer is that silence belongs to speech, and it can belong to noise. And for example, if the windows were shut, there will be something like a silence in the noise. But if I do that, there will be a silence within speech. So, of course, they has not exactly the same value. But you are putting on the table another way to be silenced. It's to be silenced, to be obliged to silence, to be constrained to silence. And this is absolutely what cannot or must not happen if you want a democracy. And that is absolutely the way in which Aristotle, for example, but the Greek, linked the fact to have logos and the fact to be politikos. But you are always able to take speech and to speak in a democracy. And that's all. There is no other commitment. But this one is very strong.
I'd like to also draw attention to several ways in which silence is used. The writer Perumal Murugan, when he was forced to withdraw his books by the Hindu nationalists, he wrote an article saying that the writer Perumal Murugan is dead and he's now committed to silence. Now this is a way in which silence is used as a kind of speech or a logos to tell us that it is now, my silence is now your responsibility to take care of. We are responsible. And then in a certain way, Barbara and someone called Divya Dwivedi together created a journal which will be available online very shortly. It's called Review the Farm Philosopher or Review of Women Philosophers, where they persuaded Murugan to come out of this and then speak about this act of silence itself. And then there is the authoritarian silence. This can happen inside philosophy, like Wittgenstein at the end of his Tractatus says that what cannot be said should be left over in silence. Now this is a very authoritarian silence, which Wittgenstein thinks that he has attained to this silence through his mystical experiences and meditations, and he's asking us to respect him on the basis of this silence. And then there can be also people with authority. They exercise silence as a way to intimidate. They don't speak much. So silence can be codified in various ways.
നമുക്ക് ഈ സെഷൻ സമാപിക്കാനുള്ള സമയമാണ് ആയിരിക്കുന്നു. അതിനു മുൻപ് ഈ നിശബ്ദതയെക്കുറിച്ചൊരു കാര്യം കൂടെ ഞാൻ പറഞ്ഞുകൊണ്ട് നമുക്ക് അവസാനിപ്പിക്കാൻ തോന്നി. നിശബ്ദതയ്ക്ക്, പെരുമാൾ മുരുകൻ്റെ നിശബ്ദതയ്ക്ക് ഒരു ഫോഴ്സ് ഓഫ് വെപ്പൺ ആയെങ്കിൽ, ഇപ്പോൾ 2002 ഗുജറാത്തിൽ നടന്ന ഒരു ജിനോസൈഡുണ്ട്. ഈ ജിനോസൈഡിൽ ഗുജറാത്തിലെ ജനങ്ങളും നിശബ്ദരായിരുന്നു ദീർഘകാലം. അവിടെ ഈ ജിനോസൈഡിനെ സംബന്ധിച്ചിട്ടുള്ള ഗുജറാത്തിലെ ജനങ്ങളുടെ സൈലൻസാണ് 3 തവണ 4 തവണ അല്ലെങ്കിൽ 25 വർഷമായി ഗുജറാത്തിൽ ആ വംശഹത്യക്ക് നേതൃത്വം കൊടുത്ത പാർട്ടികളെ തിരഞ്ഞെടുത്തിരിക്കുന്നതും ഈ നിശബ്ദതയാണ്. അപ്പോൾ നിശബ്ദത ഒരേ സമയം പ്രതിരോധത്തിൻ്റെ ചിഹ്നമായും ഫാസിസ്റ്റത്തോടുള്ള കോംപ്ലിസിറ്റിയുടെ ചിഹ്നമായും പ്രവർത്തിക്കാൻ സാധ്യതയുണ്ട് എന്ന് നമ്മുടെ കണ്ടംപററി ഇന്ത്യൻ പൊളിറ്റിക്കൽ സിറ്റുവേഷൻ തെളിയിച്ചുകൊണ്ടിരിക്കുകയാണ്. എന്തായാലും വളരെ ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ആയ, സാധാരണ ഫിലോസോഫിക്കൽ ഇഷ്യൂസിനെ കുറിച്ച് നടക്കുന്ന ചർച്ചകളിൽ സാധാരണ കേൾക്കാത്ത ഒരു തീമായിരുന്നു നാം ഇവിടെ കോൺവെർസേഷൻ വിധേയമാക്കിയത്, വോയിസ് ആൻഡ് ഫിലോസഫി. ഈ വിഷയത്തെക്കുറിച്ച് വളരെ എമിനൻ്റായ 2 ഫിലോസഫേഴ്സ് വളരെ ഇൻട്രസ്റ്റിംഗ് ആയി നമ്മളോട് സംസാരിച്ചു, അല്ലെങ്കിൽ അവർ സംവാദത്തിൽ ഏർപ്പെട്ടു. ഈ സംവാദത്തിൽ ഇത്ര നേരവും പേഷ്യൻ്റായി ഇത് കേട്ടിരിക്കുകയും ഈ സംവാദത്തിൽ സ്വയം പങ്കെടുക്കാൻ തയ്യാറാവുകയും ചെയ്ത ഇവിടെ ഇരിക്കുന്ന എല്ലാ ആളുകളോടും ഞാൻ നന്ദി പറയുന്നു. ഈ കോൺവെർസേഷന് തയ്യാറായ ഷാജ് മോഹനോടും ബാർബറ കാസാനോടും ഒരിക്കൽ കൂടി നന്ദി അറിയിച്ചുകൊണ്ട് ഈ സെഷൻ അവസാനിക്കുന്നു.